Let's talk Dexter Season 7, Episode 4, entitled Run. A lot goes on in this episode, not quite as much as the previous episode, but at the beginning of this episode, Deborah has this weird dream when she falls asleep in the bathtub of blood overflowing in the bathtub and Dexter coming to her telling her that he loves her. And she wakes up, Dexter's not there, and water is falling out of her bathtub. She's definitely having some anxiety, PTSD over what's happened. She goes to talk to Dexter the next morning at the police department about a little bit about his life outside, what happened with Rita and all this other stuff. So they kind of have a heart to heart outside. And Deborah is getting closer to accepting what he does. At the same time, they get Spelter in there, the guy who ended up murdering the girl that night there and almost killed Deborah. And they've got him in there, and Deborah needs to get a confession. And she does get a confession from the guy that he actually killed these girls. And so that's a big win for Deborah. Dexter is relieved for her because she's had a lot of anxiety over this and the fact that that girl got killed. At the same time, we have these guys from Russia looking for Dexter. They figure out that Dexter was the owner of the boat. They find out who he is, and they're going to go looking for him. But they need to get the police department, finding out that he works for the police department, that he works for the police department. They need to get him off, not just him, but the whole police department off of their back. So what they do is they take the, the bartender that was there, and they actually make him write a confession and have him blow his own brains out there in his own home in exchange for taking care of his family. So they promise they're going to make sure his family is okay for the rest of their lives if he commits suicide. So he does. Batista realizes later that this is all a setup. He knows that this was way too convenient. So Batista is on to them. At the same time, we have Spelter gets off. They can't go after him because there's a video that comes out where the police department never gave him his Miranda rights. So the judge throws his case out. I don't know if it's Spelter or Smelter. I can't remember. Smelter probably. And so he ends up going free, and Dexter does have to go after him. Now, Dexter does decide to do some investigation, finds this motorhome where he's been living. And while he's there, Smelter shows up and ends up having a scuffle with Dexter. Dexter actually ends up unconscious and is in a warehouse and is basically has to fight for his life to get out of this building before Smelter kills him. Dexter does get away and realizes he needs to get rid of this guy. So he lures him to the mausoleum that night in that graveyard and ends up hitting him over the head and does kill him. Also gets rid of his slides as well, burns his body, ends up cremating him. And at the same time, he sent a message to Deborah and asked Deborah to meet him at this location that evening. He wasn't sure Deborah was ever going to show up because she was pretty distraught earlier that day, because when he got off, Dexter went to her house to find out if she was okay, and she certainly was not okay. So Dexter ends up calling her that night and says, meet me there. And he wasn't sure if she was going to show up or not, but she does show up. And he said, that smoke there is Smelter. How does that make you feel? She says, glad. She said, what does that mean? He said, that makes you human. That's kind of how the episode ended. Now, we did have a little bit to do with this girl, Hannah, who is going to be a big part of Dexter's life. She shows up there at the police department to talk to Dexter a little bit. She felt like she needed to go in and give some information to the police. You find out that she was basically this guy's right-hand man, the guy who had committed suicide 2 episodes prior to this, and there are still some bodies out there that they need to find. And she comes in with some information, apparently, and she talks to Dexter, and they kind of have a little bit of a heart-to-heart there, and we're going to find out more about her in upcoming episodes. She's going to start popping up a heck of a lot more here coming up. So in this episode, we find out that Deborah also wants Dexter to give up Harrison because of what happened with Rita. She doesn't feel that Harrison is ever going to be safe with Dexter with what he does. And Dexter says, I am not leaving my son. And so we've got that going on in this episode too. But by the end, when she shows up to pick up Dexter and feels glad that this evil guy is never going to kill anybody again, it was good. She felt really good. And you can tell that they're kind of on the mend. Now, there was a scene in here where they did have that girl's funeral from the girl that this guy had killed, Smelter. He showed up to mock Deborah. And so Dexter took care of it. And that's part of the reason why she felt she felt better because this guy was out there, knew who she was, and could easily go after her as well. And she actually asked Dexter first, "Did you do this for me?" And he says no. And that's when he asked, "How does it make you feel?" So there was a little bit going on here. They didn't do anything at all with this guy who worked with Masuka. Masuka wasn't even in this episode. So that body still has not been found on Dexter's boat. I have a feeling that's probably going to come up in the next episode. So we'll see what happens in episode 5 with him, with Hannah, with the acceptance of who Dexter is with Deborah. We've got a lot going on this season, already way better than the previous season, and we're going to see where this takes us. So we'll see you guys on the next recap.